I think we could probably talk for weeks about Paul, don't you? Everybody has a different opinion. Well, what's our opinion? Yay or nay? Is there things we like about Paul? Is there things we're rethinking? Things we don't like about him? New knowledge coming along about Paul? How about his secular life? Did you know that he must have had a secular life on top of what he writes? I don't know if when you write letters, you say a lot of bad things about yourself or just good things. So now you've had 5 seconds to think. Let's have a little opinion to start out here.
Well, I can share my opinion real quick. I went from being an absolute Paul lover when I was in my dispensationalist point of view time. Then I became a Paul hater when I became messianic. Since then, I've become, I guess the best way to describe me would be a Paul tolerator. I'm just very careful when I read Paul and when I study him. And basically, the way I look at it is if he can be verified, whatever teaching I'm reading, by either the Gospels, including the ones, I mean, I'm assuming we all understand that when we say Gospels, we mean like the Gospel of Thomas as well, and the ones that should be there but aren't. And then the Nazarene Acts and the Apostolic Constitutions. If he's teaching something that's radical, my only two issues with Paul is circumcision and the meat to idols. But the circumcision we've kind of discussed, and I mean, I get it. I probably would have made the same decision, maybe even. But the meat sacrifice to idols, that's a big one because we know from the Nazarene Acts what that means. And so to just kind of poo-poo it off, well, if none of those that are offended are around, then don't really worry about it. But it's like, well, you should worry about it because there's demonic presences involved with it. So that's my main things with Paul.
You picked out a big one there, meat sacrifice to idols. I don't know, probably about a month ago, I did a podcast on that because I found something quite interesting when I was looking at meat sacrifice to idols and exactly what Paul said about that. And I believe that's in 1 Corinthians 10. I'm going to take a look. That is the chapter where Paul talks about idolatry. That's the chapter he says, I don't want you to be participants with demons. You can't drink the cup of the sovereign and the cup of demons. You can't partake of the table of the master and the table of demons. Shall we provoke Yahweh to jealousy? All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. And here we are in the passage. Verse 27.
Where are you at, Jackson? What book?
1 Corinthians 10:27. I know there's in 8 too. There's 2 places. 1 Corinthians 10, 1 Corinthians 8. So since I'm in 10, let me throw out a little bit of scripture for you all and see what you come up with. See how you understand it. Then I'll tell you a little something that's might change your mind or make you think another way. If one of the believers invites you to dinner and you're disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question on the ground of conscience. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it for the sake of the one who informed you and for the sake of conscience. I don't mean your conscience, but his or hers. For why should my liberty be determined by someone else's conscience? And if I partake with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of that for which I give thanks? So that has to do with being sacrificed by idols, and I think there's a little more in here about that. What do I imply then? That food offered to idols is anything? Or that an idol is anything? Now keep that in mind right there. What is an idol? Is it anything? Because we'll go back to that as we go back 2 chapters. No, I imply that what pagans sacrifice, they offer to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be participants with demons. You cannot drink the cup of Yahweh and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of Yahweh or the master in the table of demons. Shall we provoke the master to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? I'm going to go back to 8 now, if I can get there. If I remember this correctly, it wasn't that long ago that I did something on this. Yes. Keeping that in mind, if we start at 8, verse 1. Now concerning food offered to idols. And there's a little footnote here, but it doesn't, let's see, I can show footnotes, and I think I know what it is. I think that literally this is saying concerning meat offered idols. We know that all of us possess knowledge, gnosis, Gnosis. This gnosis puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. Therefore, as the eating of food offered to idols, we know that, quote, an idol has no real existence. Paul's quoting somebody else there. And that, here's a second quote, there is no God but one, unquote. For although there may be many so-called gods in heaven or on earth, and indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom all things and for whom are all things, and for whom we exist, and one Master, Yeshua HaMashiach, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. Now, one more paragraph. However, not all possess this gnosis, but some, through former association with idols, eat food as really offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. Food will not commend us to God. We are no worse off if we do eat it, do not eat it, or no better off if we do. But take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged if his conscience is weak to eat food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Messiah died, and thus sinning against your brother and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Messiah. Therefore, if food or meat makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat lest I make my brother stumble. within 2 chapters, we see pretty conflicting information. One, he talks about idols. The other, he talks about demons. And if you put them together, I think what you get is that idols equal demons. However, if you're really wise and if you're full of gnosis, if you're full of knowledge, that doesn't make any difference. That doesn't make any difference, except if someone sees you doing it and you make somebody else stumble. It's not that you're eating meat sacrificed to idols. It's not that you're eating meat sacrificed to demons. No, that doesn't mean anything. What does mean something is if you're doing it in a glass house. If people see you doing it, comments.
I don't know. No, actually, go ahead. Who was going to speak? Go ahead.
I was going to say that you see some contradictions in there. I don't have my essay, I wrote about it in front of me, but I pointed out some contradictions between those two within 2 chapters. You know, why is he going through this in chapter 8 and then coming back to it in chapter 10? There's a reason for that. But to me, it's very contradictory and very, in a way, conceited, because that's Torah. Is it not about eating animals sacrificed to idols, eating unclean meats? Is this not Torah?
Absolutely.
Does it go in the wastebasket with circumcision? Does it go in the wastebasket with women speaking? Because it's illegal in Europe, which of course, as you know, I found that it was illegal in Europe, and that Paul was not considered a Jew in Europe because the implication is that the Jews disowned him. You know, the Jews had a special dispensation in the Roman world. They could go ahead and do what they do, just don't mess with us. Go ahead and do it, don't mess with us. Because the Jews and the Romans before 60 AD, before 60 BC, were war allies. Did you know that? That the Israel and Rome were allies who had made a pact that if one was attacked, the other would come to the rescue. And that prior to 60 BC, Rome did come to the rescue of Israel when they were being invaded by the Ptolemaic kingdom, the empire in Egypt, but it turned on them. In 60 BC, the Roman general came, trying to think of his name now. You know, I'm no good with names anymore. He came in to fight the enemies. He got rid of the enemies, and then he just took over the place for Rome. And that's when the problem started. See how I can get off the subject?
Well, Paul was a Roman. I mean, we've proven that. He was a proselyte for sure, you know, but going back to that food sacrifice to idols, I mean, circumcision, nobody could really, I mean, you can't really argue against his wisdom in that, I don't think. I mean, what else is he supposed to do at that point? If he wants to further the gospel, he has to kind of, but as far as food sacrifice to idols, I mean, it's so clear. It's in Acts, if you take Acts as being true, but it's Revelation, it's all through the Nazarene Acts and stuff. And it's just like, it's pretty clear that the reason why you're not supposed to do it. So for Paul to even give a pass on it, so to speak, is that's really the one thing that's so disconcerting, especially because of the stuff from Revelation chapter 2, where Yeshua definitely speaks out against that. So that's the only thing that really unsettles me about most of, and plus his arrogance. He's arrogant, his background I'm iffy about, because I mean, the father, if he look how he saved some of our background. So I don't begrudge him that, but it is something to consider, you know, and his whole romance, to his ambitions for romance. I mean, all of that is part of who he was as a person. And it's important, I think, when if you're trying to really understand Paul, at least that's the conclusion I'm coming to, you know, as my studies go on.
Yes, absolutely. In the book, if you've ever happened to pick it up, I think it's called The Wisdom of Sociopaths. There is a chapter where the guy that wrote the book is a therapist, a psychotherapist. And he talks about how all through the book, how sociopaths, psychopaths have the edge on people who are not in succeeding in life. And he takes somebody out of history to analyze, and that is Paul. He chooses Paul to analyze through his own letters, and he judges that Paul would probably get a 39 or 40 on the psychopath test. And he points out exactly where and why. Now, somebody talk a little about this. Well, maybe I can find this recording if it didn't go down the tube with my hard drive. Does Paul seem to have some affinity for the sociopathic way?
Well, I think another thing to, at least that I've kept in mind, is the fact that the Essenes were definitely anti-Paul, and so they definitely had reasons, and the reasons, when you start reading the writings that were removed from our scripture, so to speak, I kind of understand where his reasoning come from, or where that came from. So that to me is a pretty strong testimony as well, since that's who we, not who we follow, but that's the teachings that we kind of, you know, go with, so to speak.
Well, one of the things that really astounded me, again, if I'm not speaking off the top of my head, is that when we read the authentic letters of Paul, that these passages about meat sacrificed to idols are both spurious. That is, neither one of them are authentic with Paul. Did you get that? Sean, did you get that when you read the book?
Yeah, I did. I've read it through a few times. I actually followed along in it while you were reading. And it is worded different here, I think better actually here, but it essentially says the same thing. There's nothing glaringly different that I saw.
Well, at the end of the book, it talks about, I think, the passages that aren't authentic with Paul. And in his letters, besides the fact that 6 letters are considered not authentic, there are all kinds of chunks and pieces of Paul's authentic letters that are not his, that don't follow the language, the diction, the rhetoric, the grammar, the words used that Paul uses in the places that are quite authentic. And so sometimes there are passages that were written in the margins of an old Bible manuscript that got into the text in later ones that were being copied from that one. So my story is, yes, I was against Paul for a while, a couple of years, until, well, I learned about the laws in Europe, that he couldn't do anything in Macedonia or anyplace else unless he was to change his theology to a great extent. And then finding out that part of this stuff that we are all kind of skittish about on Paul, he never wrote in the first place. Now, how would you like that if you wrote a book on your feelings about it, what it means to follow Elohim, and then you died, but you could see in your death from an eternal place, and what you saw was that your letters were circulating as though they were scripture, except that they were shot through with falsehoods, and some devil had come in and added to and taken away, yet what was there even contradicted your own feelings, that you couldn't do anything about it because it was still being published as scripture under your name. What would you think about that for yourself? Maybe you can't imagine that kind of deal. It's hard for us to imagine writing anything that would be that popular in the end, but who knows? Who knows?
Well, you know, no, hold on, I lost my train of thought.
You did? All right. So what about today? What's food sacrificed to idols today? Does this have any bearing on today? We know it certainly did then. But do we have food sacrificed to idols today, or does it make any difference?
I think it would depend on what a person's definition of an idol was, honestly. As far as a false god, I mean, I don't really see as many, it's not like it was then, but the argument could be made. There's all different types of idolatry, but who knows?
I would say in other countries, it'd be a great problem, especially in the Far East, but not so much in this country, except foreign restaurants. The illustration I've used before is when you go in to a foreign restaurant, usually a Chinese or Javanese or Japanese or some other Far East restaurant, you might see here and there an idol, or you'll see a bowl of fruit sitting before an idol. That's a dead giveaway that, as far as I'm concerned, that if they've got images in there of their gods, and especially with food before the image, I think that's just exactly the same thing as sacrificing to idols, although it's a funny thing to think you're sacrificing a banana to an idol or an orange. However, another thing that I had noticed in some foreign restaurants, the very popular one here, this seems very secular, except when you come in and go out, there is a very large teak Buddha, a Buddha at the door, and it's usually got some stuff laying around it, trinkets and so forth. I'm not sure that would be good, very good. And in some, you have a wall design or a mural of some pagan temple in Thailand or in Cambodia that is obviously a place of worship. Sometimes they even have pictures of religious people in the habits of monastic men, you know, in those orange flowing outfits that you see once in a while. I would think if they've got a big mural in there of that, then perhaps you're in the wrong place. Or another occasion is when you go into certain Oriental restaurants and behind the sushi bar, there are all kinds of teak statues of the head of an elephant, or I should say Indian restaurants, Hindu gods, the big ones, especially a statue of Kali back there, with the goddess of the dead, which a lot of people from India still worship today. I mean, I think it's time to go. But I'll give you a little easier example. Let's hear what you do in this particular case. So you went to a meeting of some organization that you were interested in being part of, and you meet a little old lady there, you men. Maybe you women, you can meet a little old lady too, or a little old man, and you strike up a conversation, and they say to you finally, well, are you doing anything for supper tonight? You say, no, why? Well, I wanted to invite you over tomorrow night, not tonight. I want to invite you over tomorrow night for salmon. And you say, okay, sure, that'll be fine. I'll be glad to come. I don't get a home cooked meal too often. So you go over there the next night, and sure enough, there is salmon on the plate, but it's the salmon out of a supermarket that is rolled with crab meat. You've seen them, salmon like spirals, and in between the spirals, there's crab meat, and that's all cooked up, smells delicious, looks wonderful. Well, Paul would say, I think even in an unclean meat, if something as heinous as eating meat sacrificed to idols is okay, you shouldn't let it bother you. Why should that bother you? I think Paul would say, well, you don't want to dismay your hostess. Just go ahead and eat it. What would you do?
I would use it as a teachable moment.
Go ahead. Emerson, did you have something?
No, I was going to say I wouldn't eat it.
You wouldn't eat it?
No, because it's contaminated and it makes it unclean.
So how are you going to get around not dismaying your hostess?
Just be nice and explain it the best that I could.
That's the route that I've taken. That's happened to me several times. The last time was in 2015. That was the exact thing that I was served by the elderly lady, and I couldn't eat it. How about the rest of you? What would you do? It's kind of an iffy situation because you've got Paul in there saying that you shouldn't offend yourself by eating meat sacrificed to idols. Well, that would be the same for unclean meats. What would you do?
I don't eat it. I let them know that it's not something I do, and I'll just eat the sides and apologize for the inconvenience.
Are you just copying Kenneth?
He and I are in the same frequency.
Okay. How about you, Marshall? What about one of your lady friends or somebody that you're in business with, if you're still there?
Yeah, I'm here. I wouldn't eat it if I didn't feel like if it went against my conscience. And it's easier for me because I'm a vegetarian, so
Yeah,
I don't eat
was
it.
thinking that. Okay, so everybody's going to say no. How about next time you go in and see that your Chinese dinner leeks and cabbage and all might have been sacrificed to one of their many devilish idols there. I don't have a problem going into a foreign restaurant if there's none of that stuff in there. Same way with the church. I don't have a problem doing church if there are no pagan symbols in there. Fortunately, the church that I work at has no pagan symbols or anything like that. I think that has a lot to do with my explanation to them that I couldn't stay in there with them if it did. How about you? Do you feel some kind of heaviness in the presence of, shall we say, heathens in worship or in secular pursuits?
I can share one time when I was Catholic in Watertown. I remember, I think I might be wrong, but was it called Liturgy of the Hours, where they put the Eucharist in the they call it the monstrance. It's a big sunburst, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you sign up and you do like hour shifts where you kneel in front of it and kind of just pray in front of it. I did my shift. It was like 1 or 2 in the morning. I don't remember. It was real late, but I can remember in front of that thing, I had goose flesh and I felt like there was someone standing behind me, and it was the whole thing just completely creeped me out. And to this day, I mean, I can go into like a real, a Roman Catholic church. There's a lot of statues and stuff. I don't like to. I definitely feel uneasy in them. But like a good old down the street community church or Bible church, I have no problems at all. But some of those big cathedrals sketch me out a little bit.
I know what
Okay.
you mean.
Continue.
I was going to say I can relate. But I too I've also been to like, because I was out in California for a while and I really enjoy Indian food.
Yeah.
And so, they have all sorts of gods that they worship in their religion. But I would just go in there and I'd be really friendly and get to know the people and, they'd likely see me bow my head and bless the Heavenly Father and the food before I ate it. But I definitely make sure I do in those cases.
Do you think you're able to disarm the effigies of gods in those kind of places? I mean, sometimes if you make it a ministry, kind of like you're talking about, and get to know those people, and you are displaying the habits of a Torah-centric person, you're going to win over, maybe not to your religion, but certainly get some respect from some of the people that get to know you there, and then start feeling a little more comfortable. And then finally, you're going to feel maybe like you've disarmed that stuff. They can't be too strong in there anyway. What do you think?
I think that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, we obviously serve the mighty one of the living, and there is no more powerful being than him. So we have the power to disarm situations like that. And even if it, like in the case of the those Hindu places, I wasn't eating meat either. So it's like I wasn't worried about that. They have a lot of vegetarian options, but I think that there's a lot of power to us being the image of Elohim, being able to Baruch things, you know, and bless them. I think there's power to that. And we can definitely like negate things that might have been there beforehand.
Especially if your favorite dish is tandoori chicken, red chicken. Yeah, I think so too, to some extent. Unless they're actually really worshiping such things. And, you know, you can get yourself in Dutch there if that is the case. Now, Marcel, are you still listening? Are you still listening? Maybe not.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Yes.
Okay. Would you mind relaying a couple of stories about your son Grayson when he was little, when he encountered such things?
If you a little more, which
Yeah, there was one, I think it was called St. Francis Church. I think it was in Sarasota, maybe. And then there was another one when we were looking at another instance when we went into that ancient Episcopal church in
oh,
Pensacola.
okay.
What this
Well,
kid did.
the one was Garrick, the older boy,
Okay.
the first one, when we were talking about I think we were talking about St. Patrick's Day and the cross with the sun around it. And when we were attending that church, we saw it and had never noticed it before, but it came to our attention because we'd been studying it. And Garrick just said, let's never go back there. I just remember him saying, oh, we cannot go back there. And then Grayson's, I just remember him kind of bowing when he was really young. I think he was only 4. You saw him do that he just kind of did a little curtsy at the front of the church, and you asked him what he was doing, and he said, surrendering to the Lord.
You remember, if you were a Catholic, how you go in to down the aisle up to the front to the Eucharist, and you do a little curtsy there and bow a little bit and then go to your seat. I don't know if they still do that now, but the kid just goes in there at 4 years old, walks straight down the aisle. I don't know where he saw this before. It was a Catholic Episcopal church, and he went down there to the front to the monstrant, and he did a little curtsy, and then he came back and sat down. I thought that was really funny. I mean, you can get in the habit of those things through your bringing up that little kids are watching what you're doing. That's why we have such a bunch of rotten kids today. Seems like.
Well, there are Hebraic traditions of bowing, and you know, when you say the Amidah, you bend at the knees when you say certain parts of it and bow forward, and you know, face towards Jerusalem when you're praying that in the Shema. So, you know, I think that when we practice some of those, people might call them rituals or postures, that they can be meaningful if they have, you know, a point to them. It just helps you to focus more on worship, for me anyway.
Take a look at this picture. It's a cultural religious thing, and I'm sure that it does help, because I'm still stuck on some of those church things that I think are valid enough for us to recapture. This is a monstrant, and the reason I bring it up in the first place, you see this little circle here? You'll find that in front, usually a Catholic or Orthodox church, sometimes some Episcopal churches maybe. But the reason that they go in there and do that little curtsy is because in the little circle, that's where Jesus is. He's a little wafer, and he's displayed in the monstrance. And that's not just a symbol of him, that is him. That's why they believe that you are to crucify Christ daily or crucify him every week. Usually in some larger city, there's a mass every day where Christ is crucified afresh. And that's what that thing is, if you've ever seen one before. They're beautiful, but they're kind of sinister.
Is that made of pure gold?
They're supposed to be.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Catholic Charismatic Renewal, where they have the larger wafer in there. And this adorns it to make it look quite a bit more like the sun. And they are alluding to the S-U-N of righteousness, calling attention to Jesus, who's right inside there, waiting to be sacrificed again.
Maybe it's the Eye of Horus.
Maybe it started out that way. It's like they say of some countries, 90% Catholic and 100% voodoo. Right, I'll get rid of this.
Hey, Jackson, can I ask you something real quick? It's off topic, but I just want, and we don't have to talk about it now, but just if you could, unless you already know, but in Philippians 3, in verse 11, I should read it out of the authentic letters of Paul, actually, but I have it in my King James just because of my old notes in it. But basically it says, if by any means am I detained unto the resurrection of the dead. When I did my research, there was an extra ek in there in the Greek, so it was like an out resurrection, kind of, I guess, to put it in English. And it only appears, as far as I could tell, in 2 other places, in Luke 20 and 24, and where he does it again, he uses it again, and he talks about those that are counted worthy to obtain the resurrection, quote unquote, out from the dead, neither married nor given in marriage, that verse. So I was wondering if, because I've always thought that Paul's running the race up before him stuff was more, he wasn't talking about like a general resurrection. It was more of a reward of faithful service kind of resurrection. And it made me started thinking about the martyrs that were resurrected in 70 AD there, or thereabouts anyways. So I started thinking about that, and I was wondering if you had ever heard about that, or if there was any validity to those verses having that extra ek in there, and if that's even significant.
I didn't get what you said, an extra something in there.
An ek in the Greek, ek, for like out of.
Yeah, out of.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes they use that, they double those, what do they call those, prepositions? They double those prepositions, sometimes by accident, sometimes to emphasize those, and then some grammatical constructions require a double preposition, out of something. So let me look at the verse here. Which is through faith in Messiah, the righteousness, which is from Elohim by faith, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death, if by any means I may attain the resurrection from the dead. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
I would agree with what you say, especially in light of the study we did Tuesday night with Enoch, because the parables or similitudes of Enoch, if you noticed, chopped the resurrected into several classes or castes. Zadikim, Kadoshim, what was the other one? Bakarim. And it certainly appears throughout the book of Enoch that these three categories are not the same thing. They are, like you said, the saints symbolized by 144,000 in Revelation who returned to Mount Zion. The Revelation talks about the rewards that are with them. And though those particular terms themselves, like the Son of Man, need to be explained much further, which Enoch will help us to do, I think that Paul is following right along with that kind of thinking. There are essays and even books that show Paul's parallels with the thinking of Enoch. So what I'm thinking is the Zadikim, Bakarim, Kadoshim, they're different levels of a person's obedience. And you can actually consider one over the others to be a higher circle of obedience or a closer circle in the koinonia, that is the fellowship of his sufferings, than the other two. I think the closest circle of holiness would be, of the three, the Bakarim, second, the Zadikim, thirdly, the Kadoshim, the Kadoshim being those general believers, those set apart ones for maybe not the highest resurrection, but for the resurrection of the dead, as opposed to the Kataim, sinners, and those that are just plain evil. So the question was like, is this like a personal reward system? Till my trophies at last I lay down. Is that what you're asking?
Well, yeah, I guess in a way it would be claimed as that. It's like in Mark 9 through 10. I was reading this and I could never, this doesn't make sense to me, but it says, and I'm reading out of the Sinaiticus here, but it says, as they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them that they should tell no one what things they had seen, unless when the Son of Man should have risen from the dead. And they kept the saying among themselves, inquiring what to rise from the dead is.
Okay.
So I thought about that, and I said, why would they question? Even Martha knew. You know, she says, Master, I know he'll rise again at the last day. So, is he saying something? Is something different there, or is that why they're not understanding?
Yeah. So Mark, reading through Mark, you will see something different in there than the other Gospels, if you can catch it. It's called by scholars the Messianic secret. Why is it that time after time, Yeshua tells his disciples, who at the end of the book, they're big failures anyway, not to spread the news, not to tell anybody, to keep this quiet, to keep it secret? Why time after time? That's a whole different theological issue that we could get into sometime, but it's called the Messianic secret. He never wants them to go out and tell anything. You know, what you're talking about there happens several more times in Mark. Don't tell anything. That is absent in the other Gospels. I would say go out to Goggle, Google, and type in quotes, messianic secret. And you'll come up with all kinds of essays and answers to that question. You said between Mark 9 and 10?
Yeah, Mark chapter 9, verses 9 and 10.
Mhm.
Specifically verse 10, where they were wondering what rising from the dead would mean, the disciples.
Yeah, the disciples, the actual Gospel of Mark ends up chapter 16, verse 8. The rest of that is an add-on. You know, Mark has 4 different endings, maybe 5. It ends up by saying concerning the disciples, and they were afraid. That's really the end of the book. And you'll notice through the book, not only is there a messianic secret, but the disciples are a bunch of failures. They don't succeed in anything. The book ends up with them being afraid. In your particular passage, they don't know what's going on. They don't understand anything. They're really a bunch of dummies. And the fact is, perhaps somebody tore the actual ending of Mark off of there at chapter 16, verse 8, where it might tell why Mark displays the disciples as such a bunch of dumb failures. That would be a pretty good reason to tear the rest of the text off. But you'll notice if you got a good study Bible, it should list, at least, let's see. The traditional ending is the one about drinking poison, lifting up serpents, and so forth. That's a traditional one, but there's the shorter ending too. And then there's the ending of Ephraim, the so-called church father. And the original ending, the 4th ending, is actually at 16:8. And they were afraid. And even the stranger thing about that is it says literally, they were afraid, for the conjunction is at the end. It's as though it's going to tell you what for, but it's torn off. So the way that they end it in the study Bible is, for they were afraid. But actually what it says, they were afraid, comma, for, and you're expecting a reason why. But there's none there. So those are a couple of the attributes of the Gospel of Mark that also give scholars a little insight into their concern for when Mark was written as the earliest gospel. You know, they found excerpts from the Gospel of Mark in a paper mache mask a few years ago that they found in Cairo, Egypt. It was a celebratory or a theatrical mask made out of paper mache. On the inside of that mask, the paper they had used was part of the Gospel of Mark. And they can date that paper, and they did, but now that mask has disappeared. The person that found it, the person that owns it, will not let there be any study on it or any analysis, and nobody can even see it. They put it in their vault. So on one side's the pagan mask, and on the other side is the Gospel of Mark in a very, very early manuscript. That's why it's considered early. Okay, anything else we want to talk about in this time? because it's almost the hour time and I'm doing most of the talking here again.
There's some other things I had to talk about, but if we got into them now, it would run us way over. But yeah, no, this was a profitable conversation for me for sure.
Is it too short or shall we do it a while? I just get tired after an hour.
Yeah, that's fine, brother. I was really, my main question was that one about with that extra ek there in the Greek. That was because that would.
Okay, let me look at that again. And that is, once again, where?
Philippians 3:11.
Okay, let me write that down.
Yeah, I'll give you, there's a couple other places it occurs. Too.
Yeah, there's several places.
I think well, according to my note I jotted in my margin here, there's only 2 other places it occurs, but I could be wrong.
Ek.
It's like an extra.
There's a passage in the gospel that says, with desire I have desired to eat this Passover with you, but I will not eat it until I do so in the kingdom. With desire I have desired. It's got the same word twice in a row, and they wonder, how are they going to translate this? Some translate it greatly desired. Some leave it desired with desire. They just don't know exactly why there's 2 of them, but I would probably guess that it is a scribal error. I don't know about you, if you have ever copied by hand a rather long manuscript. You're bound in the first 2 or 3 pages to do the same thing. And perhaps the next scribe that comes along, so this must mean something. Or understand, if you're a scribe and you're copying manuscripts all the day long, every day you're going to just be able to practically do this while you're asleep and make plenty of errors while you're at it. But that's also interesting. So let me look at that, see what I can find.
Those other 2 verses were Luke 20:35.
Okay.
Then
What's
Luke,
the word there?
It's the same with that extra ek in there for the out resurrection, so to speak. And then in 24:46 is the 3rd place it occurs.
What's the third one?
Luke 24:46. That same that ek appearing with the word resurrection there.
Same word, did you say?
Yeah, it's the same. Yep, it appears right before the word resurrection, so it's almost like an out resurrection kind of, I guess.
All right, that sounds interesting. I'm going to look at that. And I appreciate those of you that came. I wish that you would come again when we do this, and maybe we can spread out what the topic is going to be, so I don't have to talk all the time and monopolize the conversation. Okay? Did you all get your calendars?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Did anybody check that calendar yet? And
I
see if
opened
it's
it.
All right.
I opened it and glanced through it, but I haven't got a chance to really go through it
Yeah,
yet.
me either. Okay, you guys, I've been thinking about maybe publishing it here, but Norman sent me all the material needed to take the PDF down to Staples and have them make one. Everyone could go have their own made for a lot less than I could make them and sell them for. So it is a printed copy. And while we're on the subject, for those who are hearing this on YouTube or Hebrew Nation Radio, that's the Norman Gray Zadokite 364-day solar calendar that we've used for about 10 years now. Very accurate, full of notes, full of commentary, beautiful, big, easy to read. You can use it for sundowners or sun uppers. Either one, it works fine. And you can have one of these if you just get in touch with us at our contact form at www.yahad.me. I'll send it right over to you. Thank you, folks. See you Shabbat. Oh, by the way, Shane, Sean, if you're still there, I'm going to do that 70 AD thing with a rapture on Shabbat.
Cool.
Or I'm going to try to. So maybe you can help me out there a little.
Marcel just posted she would like to talk about logos in the context of John 1. That would be awesome. I was telling her that logos, it makes me think of Memra in Hebrew. It's because I know a lot of people liken it to Torah, but the word Torah, I think it's more like Memra, but that's just me.
Yeah. Okay, brother. God bless you.
Shalom.
Shalom.